So thanks for joining us, Derick. What will you be talking about at the PHP UK Conference in February?
I will be talking about how to save yourself some time by using a debugger. And what I mean by that is that there's different ways of doing debugging. Some of them are more efficient than others. And even if you do end up using a debugger, there might be features in there that you're not aware that actually exist.
I see. So some people, possibly myself included, often litter our code with var dump statements.
Mm-hmm.
What will something like Xdebug offer beyond that way of debugging?
Beyond committing var dump statements.
Yeah, and then
you make a joke out of it, but I literally, while waiting to join this call, I got a message from the bug system that I used that had committed debugging statements and had to make a new release. So this isn't a trivial thing, right? It happens all the time. But if you want to use var dump style debugging, then you need to know where the bug is to begin with. You need to modify the code, save it, and then load it again. Whereas if you don't know where the bug is, then you can't use that style of debugging, right? Because you can only show information coming out of your application. Whereas if you use a step debugger, then you can at least step through it and then narrow down where the issue actually is, and you can't do that with var dump debugging or DD debugging. But on top of that, it's also much more efficient, especially if you always have it live and always going. Like when I do development, the debugger is just always there. It's always enabled, it runs all the time. So it becomes routine to just set a breakpoint and then it just works.
Oh, I see. So the whole time you're working on code, Xdebug will be in the background, and when you run it, you can just stop things. And
I have it enabled. I have it enabled for every request.
And what information can it tell people?
Control flow, contents of all the variables, exceptions. If you're using fibers, it just shows you the fiber context. It shows you return values when you're stepping out of functions. Shows you exception values since PHP 8.5 and the upcoming Xdebug 3.5, which will be out by the time the conference runs. You can also see the intermediate values going through pipes, which is a new feature in PHP 8.5, and a whole bunch more of that. And that is just talking about the debugger. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other things, how you can trigger the debugger as well that are new. Especially if you have things like long-running scripts, then there's usually wasn't a way of starting to debug just a specific part of it, because Xdebug only connects when the script starts. So there's now some functionality in there that allows you to trigger either a connection to the IDE or a breakpoint when the script is already running. So this kind of features.
Oh, and that is quite a new thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's new in Xdebug 3.4. But only on Linux, and 3.5 adds experimental support for Windows in there. And the idea is that if you're familiar with a debugger from, say, C++ or C# or something, it allows you to attach the debugger to an already running process. And this would also allow IDEs like VS Code or PHP Storm, if they choose to do so, also attach to a PHP process that is already running, and then debug it.
So I suppose that's quite handy if you were going to debug like queue processors and things like that, which just sit going forever and ever. So some of the benefits not only are, if I was going to do the var dump style of debugging, I'd have to know what I was going to do, what I was in, the bit of code I'm potentially interested in, which I might be wrong, and then the information I'm dumping out might not be all of the information that I need, and Xdebug shows me everything. So once it's set up, I've got very in-depth analysis of it.
You get to show what you need and what you don't need, right? Like even if you do a var dump with a big tree structure, you get so much information in there that you might not be interested in, but you still have to sift through it. Whereas with Xdebug, you only see the top level coming out of the tree, so the first properties or array elements, but you can dive into the things that you then need to do without having to see or sift through the rest of the information.
Nice. And are there certain kinds of projects that Xdebug is quite good for? I mean, I'm guessing kind of more legacy projects, or does it work with everything?
I use it for everything. Most of my projects are legacy, because I've been working on them for so long, but a few things that are new, like Xdebug Lite, we'll get back to that in a moment, I'm sure. is newer code, and I still use it because it's sometimes so much easier to go through the code while it's running than writing unit tests. But even if I write unit tests, sometimes it's still useful to be able to debug the unit tests themselves as well. So yeah,
I see. So even people doing like practices like TDD would still benefit from using debuggers and things like that.
Especially if it gets more complicated. Well, they're not so much unit tests anymore, but sometimes people use unit tests like integration tests almost, or a level in between almost, and that's still useful there to see what's going on.
Yeah, okay. And what do you say to people who say things like, "Oh, it's so difficult to set up a debugger"? I mean, is it really these days?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, basically in a setup, you can get this going in about 5 minutes. But sometimes the tricky bit comes not from the Xdebug side, but it comes from the IDE side. Like PHP Storm has some extra requirements that it needs, which for Xdebug doesn't care about. But it wants to match like server names to anything like something else. And command line script don't have a server name, right? So you need to set a server name. But that's the PHP Storm requirement. And curiously, when I set up my own projects, I never run into these things because I never set up my projects in PHP Storm with a web server configured. Because if you don't do that, then it pops up at the first debugging request coming in, and then it just works. And then on top of that, you need to make path mappings. You need to map. This is not always the case, but if you run the application in Docker or on another machine, for example, the file system looks different than where you added the files on your local file system. And these path mappings you need to make in your IDE. But since Xdebug 3.5, which isn't quite out yet, but it will be at the time of the conference, Xdebug will have support for native path mapping. So as long as you have a similar setup, then you can map these in your project without you having to do that in your IDE itself. So I'm aware of these things existing and trying to improve them, but it's usually an issue on the IDE side.
Sure. Oh, that's interesting. Of course, because just playing that back. So in Docker, my paths might look different to how they look in the IDE, and hence the need for these mappings, so that if you're setting a breakpoint in your IDE, it can know where the corresponding path is in Docker. Is that, for an example of the kind?
Yeah. So if you use the path mapping in the IDEs, then the IDE does the translation. If you use the native path mappings in Xdebug 3.5, then Xdebug will use the path mappings, and the IDE doesn't realize anything really.
I see. So if you're using IDEs like PHP Storm, then Xdebug 3.5 will make your life even easier.
Yeah.
And you know.
Yeah, I haven't. Go ahead.
Sorry.
I haven't tried setting up path mappings on both sides, but I'm pretty sure that's still going to work. But you shouldn't.
So people who've potentially had issues setting up a debugger before 3.5 will make it even easier.
Yeah, and that is on the new features side of Xdebug, but sometimes you still get more trickier networking setups where Xdebug can't connect to your IDE directly, and then you need to find something else.
Yeah. And what inspired you to start creating Xdebug? I mean, it sounds like a difficult problem to solve.
Yeah, well, my first software language that I learned and used was Turbo Pascal. And that had a really useful debugger in it. And when I started with PHP, my applications, or I can't call them applications back then, my hacky scripts back in 2001, wanted to help to do some debugging with that as well. That just didn't exist. And, well, I was young. I had a lot of free time. So decided, well, have a look at doing these things.
Wow, and here we are 24, 25 years later, still.
23 for Xdebug, but yeah. Yeah, I just looked up the other day, my first contribution to the language itself was in 2000.
Wow.
In June 2000. So
brilliant.
Been around for a while.
Indeed. And you also make something called Xdebug Cloud. What is that for?
So that is exactly made for that kind of situations where networking setup is really hard. Like a common use case that I see some of the users of that use is they have a shared development server somewhere and people working from home. working on the same development server doing their projects, or the same project sometimes. And because you need to get Xdebug to make a connection to a specific developer's IDE, you need to have some kind of SSH tunnel, right? Now, you can set this up from where the user is to where the development server is as a reverse tunnel, but then you can only have one developer do it at the same time because Xdebug needs to make a connection and doesn't know which port to connect to, for example. And so Xdebug Cloud is a way of going around that, where your development machine, when Xdebug starts, it makes a connection to cloud. Your IDE registers with cloud, and then that forwards the debugging session between these. So you don't need to have a direct network connection.
And is Xdebug Xdebug Cloud, is that like something you pay for? Is that a subscription?
Yeah, it's because it requires resources, so it can't be for free, and it's also a way of helping Xdebug support itself as well, because getting support for open source projects isn't a very simple thing to do, and having a way of cross-pollinating that with some paid-for services is, I think, a reasonable way of doing it. It's the same thing that PHP Stan does, for example, as well, right? With that PHP Stan Pro product, or whatever they call it.
And are there other ways people can support, if they're using Xdebug and they don't need Xdebug Cloud, are there other ways that they can support the work that you do to make it even better?
There's GitHub sponsors, which I think is a good way for individual developers to help support Xdebug if they use it in their course of their work. But I also provide support for businesses, which works fine in voice, which is sometimes easier to do for business than for my accountant. And with that, you could also you get to email me and I will answer your emails. Because otherwise, if there's any sort of agreement, then I don't answer private emails at all.
Sure. You
need to use community-orientated services.
Yeah.
Because I would drown in the queries. Right?
Yeah. The port request, I imagine. Yeah. I'm guessing it's a very popular application, Xdebug. I'm going to guess it's like being downloaded billions of times. Or
it's hard to say, right? Because I don't do telemetry, so I don't know how many people are using it. I would love to have telemetry in there, but I also know that I really can't do that because it's not ethical to do.
Yeah,
it's one of these conundrums. Yeah. As an open source provider, you never know how many people use their own stuff.
And I suppose, if it's a package, you could sort of count packages downloads, but then people package things up so much, you've just got no idea, especially like Xdebug type things.
And they come from GitHub, they come from Packle, they download the source. You just never know for sure who's using it. Also, I've seen people putting it in CI for every run, and that's not really a user either then, is it?
No. So there's many ways that people can support your work, and I suppose people could just get Xdebug Cloud as just an easy way of, even if they never use it, it's just a way of paying back and supporting you that way.
That's also possible. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Cool. And so speaking at PHP UK Conference. What is it you love about the PHP UK Conference?
Well, it's the only conference I can walk to, basically. But it's still 2 hours, but it is walkable. No, I've been coming and speaking mostly speaking, except for last year because I forgot to click the submit button. But speaking since 2004, maybe. Oh, wow. So I've been coming back here. Yeah, it's my home conference. It's always fun to show some of the other attendees and speakers the delights of this lovely city.
Yeah.
And it's also a good way of promoting the language itself, and having this annual gathering also makes connections beyond just teaching what new things in PHP is PR or around, or whatever Docker container people stuff come up with and things like that. So it's beyond the knowledge part of it. It's also just as important to have the networking effect of these.
And do you often, I mean, people talk about the hallway tracker at conferences. Do you have, like, really useful? Do you often have lots of great conversations? Do people talk to you about Xdebug and ask you questions?
It depends a little bit on which bits of the hallway track, right? I mean, if it's while talks are going on, it tends to be people I already sort of know. Whereas if there's some breaks in between, then it's much easier, of course, for people that are not attending the sessions to come and talk and ask questions or have a conversation or suggest features or things like that. So it's a bit of both, I would say.
And he open to people asking questions, if they've got some, I know there happens to be at the conference and they've got some burning Xdebug question.
Absolutely.
Fantastic, yeah. And you kind of talk about, like, one of the things you like coming to these conferences is you can talk about all the things going on and maybe where the language is going. Have you got any thoughts on where PHP is going for the next few years?
I think we'll see more Type P syntax features get introduced or refined. And beyond that, I don't actually know, because this is the thing. People ask me this question all the time. Not only me, but ask this question all the time. And the answer is, like, PHP will go where the internet is going, I think. And where that is, we don't know.
There might be some more, as everything seems to be going that way, more AI type things, but we'll just...
Yeah, but I'm not so sure how useful that is to embed it straight into your web applications. So we might see some protocol-related extensions, like when JSON became a thing, right? PHP introduced a JSON extension because everybody wanted to use that. If that is something that happens for AI-related things, or I don't like using the term machine learning kind of things, then we might see something about that as well. But at the moment, it's not something that I am aware of.
Okay.
That there is anything that should be added to PHP to make that doable.
And I suppose you are quite involved in the PHP Foundation. Do you work with them?
So yeah, the PHP Foundation is now 4 years and a bit old. And it was started to get people to be paid to work on the PHP language. So at the moment, there's 11 people that are funded partly or full-time by the PHP Foundation to work on the language. I tend to use that to look after the extension that I have, and I'm now doing most of the server maintenance, which was a gigantic mess and it needed fixing. And we're sort of coming to the end of that. And then, basically all the major features that you've seen in PHP introduced in the last 3 years are done by the developers that are being supported by the PHP Foundation. I think it's a great way forward to make sure that the language continues going. Yeah.
So that's, I suppose, another way companies who, I suppose, profit from the use of PHP can support the PHP, can support the system that they make their money from. Sponsor the foundation.
Yeah, that is the whole idea behind it, right? It's like there's so many companies that make use of the language, and if they have a vested interest in the language existing beyond the next year or two, right? And it being maintained and it being made better. And the foundation is a vehicle for that, to basically collect on one side all the features that we would like to introduce into language, and on the other side to raise some funds to make sure that the language can do these things, can go forward.
So so if companies are benefiting from PHP, then this is a great way of kind of, I suppose, paying back and also making it better, making the language even better in the future, or this will support making the language even better in the future via the foundation.
Yeah, and it's not only companies, but you'll see, like the German Sovereign Tech Agency, they sponsored some features, not direct features in the language, but features of the ecosystem. Like PHP now has a new extension installer called Pi that was funded partly by the Sovereign Tech Agency, which is an organization of the German government. Okay. I'm pretty sure that the EU is setting up funds like this as well. And I think that is also a good way, right? Because countries and organizations like that realize that, well, open source is sort of important because it is one way for us to make sure that we're not tied to the big US tech companies or less reliable on them, because I think they started to realize that that might not always be the wisest thing or the safest thing to do, especially in these trickier times.
These interesting times politically, yes. And did the foundation recently do some security analysis on PHP as well?
So that was last year, and that was also something that was supported by the Sovereign Tech Fund, as it was then called. They just changed their name. It's the same organization. We hired an external company to do a security audit of the language. They found quite a lot of stuff, not something that is like important that would compromise your service or things like that, but lots of things where there were actual security issues in the language. These have obviously been fixed now, but yeah, it's a good way. I mean, this kind of work is always hard to do, right? Because the professionals that know how to do these things are professionals, and that's their job to do these things and that kind of expertise. Although people can volunteer their time for it. It's like, it's not always the best way of doing that, right? And it's the same thing with like maintaining a server infrastructure. That is also something that isn't particularly fun volunteering-wise.
Yeah, and hence the foundation kind of makes, I suppose, a vehicle for that work to be done.
Exactly.
Yeah. Contributions not only to Xdebug but also the PHP language. Your talk on the 20th of February at PHP PHP UK Conference. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. All right. See you there.
Brilliant. So